Well, pre-calculus classes, as always, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. We will start into what is the second half of Chapter 4 now, and when we start into it, we're going to look at graphing using all the transformations from, if you think about your first semester product with sine and cosine waves. We won't use transformations with tangent. It'll just be sine and cosine. So the formula y equals a sine and then b times quantity x minus c plus d. The one thing that you do need to be aware of is if you look things up in the book online, they have the bx and then bc distributed out. So just kind of be aware of that. Well, as far as what A, B, C, and D are, A represents the amplitude. As far as these other two, I know I kind of am going to go a little out of order here. A is your amplitude. D is your vertical shift. C is your horizontal or phase shift. And then as far as B goes, that's going to be your horizontal stretch or shrink. And your amplitude is going to be your vertical stretch or shrink. And again, phase shifts, that's another term for the horizontal shift. So, as far as writing the equation and graphing these, well, the parent function's y equals sine of x, amplitude is 1/3, period is pi over 2. So the other thing that we are going to also give you involving when you have, finding B, the horizontal stretch or shrink, is when you're graphing, the period equals 2 pi over b. So, and then where that'll come into play is here when it does ask us to write the equation and graph it. So for our equation, y equals 1/3 sine, and then the other thing we need to do is we set the period equal to 2 pi over b, and then what I like to do is cross multiply. So b pi equals 4 pi, so b is 4. The big thing you have to watch here is that is not the period. B is going to tell us our horizontal stretch or shrink. So it's y equals 1/3 sine 4x. Now, as far as when you graph, going back to the other notes and what I'm even going to do since I don't have those handy right here, but when we graph a sine wave, two pi over 2, and 3 pi over 2. And then your max and min are 1 and -1. Well, if you remember, sine starts at 0. The next critical point is your maximum at pi over 2. Then it's a 0. Then your next critical point is a minimum. And you end up back at 0. So this is our parent function now. You do not have to graph that when you graph these. I actually prefer not to for the most part. What I do is here it says period's pi over 2. Come out here to the end. Well, what's half of pi over 2? Pi over 4. What's half of pi over 4? Well, pi over 8. Now, in terms of what's in the middle here, sometimes what may help, because this one it's not necessarily obvious, 2 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8. Well, what's in the middle of 2 pi and 4 pi over 8? 3 pi over 8. You can add these, divide by 2, basically you're averaging it out. And then whatever your amplitude is, if you just kind of like on the other one, where I indicated 1 and -1, you can just say 1/3 and -1/3. So you don't have to put the original parent function in there. And then, again, sine always starts at a 0. Next critical point's a max, back to a 0, then a minimum, and back to a 0. Now, the biggest thing that, yes, there is a vertical shrink. Max is only 1/3, and there's definitely a horizontal shrink because you've gone from a full wave of 2 pi down to a full wave of pi over 2. All right, cosine. Well, again, I'm going to quickly sketch a parent of cosine as well, just so 1, -1, again, 2 pi, pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. Cosine starts at a max, goes to a 0, minimum, 0, and then back at a maximum. I know in the 4-4 notes, sine and cosine are basically the same graph. They're just shifted. Basically, a sine wave, to get a cosine wave, you could view it as you're just shifting the sine wave left pi over 2. So they are essentially the same graph. All right, write the equation in graph y equals cosine x, amplitudes 3, periods 8 pi. So y equals 3 cosine. Again, the period equals 2 pi over b. And so when we cross multiply, 8 pi b equals 2 pi. And so then when we divide by 8 pi, b is 1/4. Now there's 2 ways you can certainly do this. If you want, you can either say 1/4 times theta. I actually prefer to just make it theta over 4 like that. Now, when you have an amplitude like this, I do actually kind of like to, mark each one. Now out here, 8 pi is your ending critical point. I was then like to half of 8 pi is 4 pi, 2 pi, and then what's in the middle of 4 and 8? Well, it's 6 pi. Again, if you want, you can add those. 4 plus 8 is 12 divided by 2 is 6 pi. Now, as far as graphing it, cosine starts at a max, goes to a 0, then a minimum, 0, and ends at a max. So from here, I know when these ones that are kind of stretched out, do your best to at least show some curvature there. So again, and this is also, you may or may not remember, in the last set of notes, I said you may even prefer to graph these without grid paper. I know that I actually do because that gives you a little more freedom in setting up your axes. So write the equation in graph. Y equals 1/2 cosine, and then period equals 2 pi over b. So 4 pi b equals 6 pi. And then when we divide, b is 3/2. So y 1/2 cosine 3x over 2. So as far as setting up our graph here, period is 4 pi over 3. Half of that is 2 pi over 3. Half of 2 pi over 3 is pi over 3. I mean, if you ever need You can even use your unit circle. Well, there's 4 pi over 3, 240. Half of that's 2 pi over 3 if you need. And then, well, what's in the middle of 2 pi and 4 pi? Well, it's 3 pi over 3 or pi. Now, it is cosine. So again, cosine, just like the one up above, starts at a max. Next critical point's a 0, then a minimum, a 0, and then we finish at a max. All right, so there are a couple of examples. Now, for these next ones, they have not given us the amplitude and period. We're going to get those from the equation. So, first, amplitude is 2. Now, the period is 2 pi over b, so it's 2 pi over 3. It is a sine wave, and 2 pi over 3 is the end of our period. Half of 2 pi over 3 is pi over 3. Half of pi over 3 is pi over 6. And then what's in the middle of pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3? Well, certainly if you need, get, when you add these up, 3 pi over 3 divide by 2, well, it's pi over 2. So, like I said, add them up, reduce it, then divide. So, from here, sine starts at 0. Next critical point's a max, then a 0, minimum, back at a 0. So there is that one. All right, next up. Y equals 1/2 cosine 4 theta. Well, again, our amplitude here is 1/2. The period is 2 pi over b is 4. So the period, pi over 2. So I'll come out, put that at the end. Well, half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. Half of pi over 4 is pi over 8. I mean, we did one of these earlier. I think that was on maybe even example 1. Yeah, b was 4. Well, again, if you need, you can 2 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8, 3 pi over 8, and then 1/2. Negative 1/2 key thing, it is cosine. So it's going to start at a max. Next critical point's a 0. Minimum, 0. Finishing at a max. Couple of others here. Y equals 5 sine of theta over 4. So amplitude is 5. Now, the period is 2 pi over 1/4. Well, think of it as 2 pi over 1, and then we'll flip and multiply. So the period is 8 pi. Half of 8 pi is 4 pi, 2 pi, what's in the middle of 4 and 8? If you need, add them up. Divide 6 pi, which I know matched one of the other examples. Yeah, example 2. And from here, 2, 3, 4, 5... It is a sine wave, so we'll start at a 0, max, 0, minimum, back at a 0. And then one more of these, and then we'll go into one other type of question. Y equals 4 cosine theta over 2. Amplitude here is 4. Period will be 2 pi over b is 1/2. So again, think of it as 2 pi over 1 times 2 over 1 is 4 pi. So we'll come out here to the end. Half of 4 pi is 2 pi. Half of 2 pi is pi. What's in the middle of 2 and 4? 3 pi. And cosine starts at the maximum, which will be 4. Then our next critical point's a 0. Then a minimum, 0, finishing at a max. All right, so that's everything that we're going to look at on graphing examples. Just a few now to finish. We'll be looking at going from the graph to the equation. So the two things that we always want to look at is first, what's the parent? Well, you can see it starts at a max, so it is cosine. Then from there, look at max is at 2, minimum's at -2, so A is 2. Now the last thing is look at from one max to the next. That's your wavelength or your period, which is 10 pi. Now, that's not what we actually use in the equation, but we use that the period equals 2 pi over b. And so then when we cross multiply, 2 pi equals 10 pi b, and when we divide, b is 1/5. So our equation will be y equals 2 cosine, and then either theta or x over 5. You know, it's kind of up to you as to what you prefer there. All right, so this next one here scales a lot different, but you can see it crosses through the origin, so that means we have a sine wave. Then from there, you can see the max is at 1/2, minimum's at -1/2, so amplitude's 1/2. And then the last thing is the period. Well, if you look right here, you can see 0 to that next 0. Now, the way it's marked, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this marking is, so the period is 4 pi over 6, or 2 pi over 3, which equals 2 pi over b. Here you probably don't even hopefully need to cross multiply that out. B is just 3. If you ever have a period where it's 2 pi over something, b is really easy to find. So our equation, y equals 1/2 sine, and either 3 theta or 3x. Kind of leave that certainly up to you as to whatever you prefer there. And just 2 others of these, and then that'll finish up the first half. All right, so again, starts at a 0. So our parent is a sine wave. The next thing, since this is a half, our amplitude there is 1/4. Now, here's one thing that is a little different. From 0 to that 0, You have to have both a max and a minimum. Here the period is 2. This is the first one we've looked at that has not involved pi in our scale. So when we cross multiply, 2 pi equals 4b. So b is pi over 2. So our equation, y equals 1/4 sine, and then pi theta over 2. So like I said, that one's a little different because the scale was not based on pi. So, you know, that's where, like, think about once around the unit circle is 6.28. So this one has been shrunk quite a bit. All right, one final example. Example 11 here, again, starts at, or it crosses at a max, so we know it's cosine. Our max and min are 3 and -3, so the amplitude is 3. And then from one max to the next, the period is pi. So when we cross multiply, 2 pi equals pi b, and when you divide, b is 2. So our equation, y equals 3 cosine 2x. So that finishes up the first part of 4.5.